even beyond the concept of stages of grief, one way that I found it helpful to think of is think about waves in an ocean. And so instead of a linear set of stages, which some may go through, think about those waves moving in, moving out. They can be overlapping, and there's not necessarily a beginning or an end.
Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Bussen, and this is Farewelling, the podcast. You know, here on the show, we talk to a lot of people about how to celebrate life and the lives of people we've lost. Sometimes we're silly and even playful, and sometimes we're more deep. But today, we're going to be talking with someone who has a lot of experience helping those who've experienced tremendous grief. So just a heads up that today's episode will definitely be more serious than some of the others. But it's an important conversation to have, and I know we have a lot to learn from this conversation, so I hope you'll join us. I'm here today with my friend and Farewelling's funeral guru, Elizabeth Karansky. Liz, thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And today, our guest is Adam Rabinovich, and he is the executive director of COPE Foundation, which is a nonprofit grief and healing organization dedicated to helping parents and families living with the loss of a child. Adam Rabinovich, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Liz, for having me and giving a chance to share a bit about COPE Foundation and the work and impact that we have had over 20 years. And thanks for all that you're building at Farewelling and the support of the community that you're creating.
Adam, could you start by telling us a little bit about COPE Foundation and how you came to be a part of it?
Certainly. So the origins of COPE come from a group of grieving parents who lost their then adult children around the same time, early mid-1990s, who came together and really leaned on each other in an informal but very crucial way in that time of their grief journey in their lives, and built out a network of support. And 20 years ago, 1999, realized that there was enough of a need and enough of a unique value that COPE could become its own standalone nonprofit, which has been now supporting more than 1,000 families over our 20 years, working across the New York City, Long Island, and suburban region. And we meet our mission, as Karen said, of supporting families living with the loss of a child in a few ways. One, and the crucial, I would say, heart of what we do are support groups for peer-to-peer support. So moms can come together with other moms living with the loss of a son or daughter. Siblings come together with other brothers and sisters living with their own loss. And in each of those support groups is and this is very important for the way that we support families, a licensed clinical professional. So this isn't therapy. This is a chance for peers to come together to lean on each other with the help of a facilitator. We also offer healing workshops in a variety of modalities, meditation and Reiki and art therapy, writing therapy.
Wow.
A summer camp for kids, which we can talk a little bit more about in the conversation. And I got to know COPE over the last year or so, both as a professional but also a deep mission connection. I'm the oldest of 3 children, and my parents lost my baby sister. She passed at a too young age, at around 2 years old. And so in our own way, my family's been living with the loss of a child. So it's been really meaningful to see the impact that COPE has had for families like mine over the last 20 years, and now to be part of that leadership team.
Wow. Well, first off, I am sorry for the loss
Thanks.
of your baby sister. For me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, just the idea of a child dying before his or her parents is so awful and terrible. It is almost just something we never even want to talk about. So I wanted to ask you if, in your experience, you think there's any difference in the grieving process for parents and families based on the age of the child they've lost or even the circumstances of their death?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly we've observed that, and probably no surprise to anyone listening, that every death has its own unique set of circumstances. Every loss is unique. And each loss can bring about and does elicit a wide variety of feelings and emotions and grief. Having said that, the common thread that we find in the work that we do at COPE is that even though the circumstance of a death of a loss may be unique to that individual and to that family and to that community, the underlying grief feelings are common. And so I go back to the support groups that I mentioned a minute ago, and there's a safe space where people come together, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, regardless of the kind of loss that they're experiencing, regardless of when the loss was, and they find that common bond and the ability to lean on each other through those feelings. On top of that, I'll just mention, though, because there's a lot of insight in your question, just yesterday I was speaking to a colleague who lost her father to death by suicide, and as she's found supportive spaces and communities to lean on, she told me, finds particular comfort and bonds with other young adults who did lose a parent to suicide. So there is that unique set of feelings and emotions in their grief journeys that's an added benefit for her in terms of support.
Well, and I mean, of course, I'm not a mental health expert, but I can only imagine that, when you're going through something like grief, it almost feels like, everyone out there is very well-meaning, but there's nothing like being able to connect with someone who can relate to you.
Empathize in a real way.
Yeah.
In a way that no one else can.
In a way that no one else could.
And it's just like that place of comfort. You can kind of relax a little and just know that you're being heard and someone gets you.
That's so well said. And as some of the COPE family members that I've talked to have pointed out, we are members of a club that no one wants to belong to. But the important word there is it's a club, and it's people who do understand, and you can get through all of the shorthand and really make that bond quickly and sustainably.
Do parents of children who've died experience grief differently or go through different stages of grief, say from someone who loses an adult partner or an older parent? And I would include in that even parents who've lost a child through miscarriage or, during the birth process. Like, is it just a different kind of grieving?
Sure. Well, just to add one piece which may be of interest to you and your listeners is the field of grief counseling and bereavement has recognized over years that even more or beyond the concept of stages of grief, one way that I found it helpful to think of is think about waves in an ocean. And so instead of a linear set of stages, which some may go through, think about those waves moving in, moving out. They can be overlapping, and there's not necessarily a beginning or an end. And in terms of the uniqueness of losing a child, one thing that seems, I think, clear both to me as a professional and as a human and a father is that none of us expect as children to be gone before our parents, and none of us as parents expect to outlive our children. So there's something about losing a child that's not part of the natural order. So that in and of itself makes it incredibly unique and perhaps uniquely painful in some ways. And then one other piece that some folks have shared with me is that for many parents, many families, children represent a sense of hope, a sense of promise for the future. So we can be mindful together that when one loses a child, one can also lose that sense of hope and promise for the future.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So in your work with parents who have lost a child, would you have 2 or 3 suggestions for helping them navigate what is an incredibly difficult process? I mean, is it maybe communication strategies or is it joining a community like the ones that you have at COPE Foundation? Other ideas? Yeah,
all of the above. So first and foremost, and I may repeat this one because I want anyone who hears it to remember to stay connected and that I are not alone. So don't isolate yourself and do reach out. The next one, which our amazing clinical director reminds me constantly and reminds our family members as well, is that prepare yourself that there will be obstacles, challenges. You might not know what they're going to be tomorrow or next year, but there's going to be. So that comes back to A, staying connected to people, and B, just to lean on the resources that you already have, whether it's your family, friends, if a house of worship is part of your network, community organizations like COPE and so many others around the country, and stay connected. And just a reminder that we're not alone.
What would you suggest if someone is seeing a family member, a friend, whomever, with a loss of a child? Is there anything that they can do, anything they can say, anything shouldn't?
Well, in terms of those of us who are there supporting others, I think something to point out is to remind the loved one, the friend, the family member, the colleague, the coworker that they're not alone, that you're with them. I'll just shout out copefoundation.org. People can certainly point their loved ones to us, and we can connect them with local resources as well, so people know that there's actions that they can take. We know that between weekly support groups, for example, that doesn't mean that grief goes away. And so we want to have tools that people can lean on at 4 a.m. in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. I neglected to mention we have a volunteer-led, it's not quite a hotline, it's not a crisis line, it's a warm line. So it's other parents living with the loss of a child who can be there for a warm recipient on the other end of the phone to be there to listen and to support. We and others are there for them and with them. Whether that's in silence or whether that's in conversation, I just want people to know that they're not alone. And then I hope that as they have others in their lives and their network expressing in their own ways the same common thread, that people know that they have others to lean on and that no one is in this alone.
And we shouldn't be afraid to, I think people sometimes just shut off. Like a well-meaning person who wants to go up to someone, they feel that sadness for their friend or their coworker, but they're just too scared to even bring it up, or they think, I don't want to bring it up because if they're already feeling bad, now I'm just making them feel bad again.
Well, I'll add one thing that I've heard from a lot of COPE family members who have been living with the loss of a child is often when they reemerge from the fog of grief, not that it ever leaves, but back into the real world, sometimes they feel that they have now got this disease called grief and people are worried that they're going to catch it from them. So they'll be standoffish. And so, no, they're not carrying something. They're going through living with loss and integrating loss, but that doesn't mean that they've lost who they are.
So, Liz, I wanted to ask, in your experience as a funeral director, how difficult it must be to actually work on the funeral or farewelling of a young child. And I wondered if most families choose to really celebrate the life of their young one at a service, or if it's just so painful that most families keep things more intimate and somber, or does it depend? Or
So I think, in the same way we've been discussing, every situation's both unique and has similarities. In my experience, people's reactions are personal. I think what's really interesting is the reaction of the funeral directors. There's these people who do this every day, but when you bring out a baby casket, the entire building, everyone reacts to it. It's just something that's so unnatural.
Yeah, it's not meant to be.
We're so used to seeing a casket and accept it. And then when it's miniature, it's, I can barely even talk about it. It's just so, as we've discussed, not the way it's supposed to be. I had a client who, it was a couple, young couple, and their firstborn passed away suddenly. And neither were from New York, but they were both living here now. And they contacted me. They knew which cemetery they wanted to use. They were both religious, and they wanted to have a full Catholic ceremony and a burial. And we went through the process, and I actually called them up late one night, and I said, you're going to hate me for doing this, but I have to make this horrible suggestion to you. And my suggestion was that they cremate their son and put him in a niche in the same cemetery. And the mother basically hung up on me, and the father called me back and said, why? And my reasoning was that at some point their lives will move on. And I didn't want them to be held to New York because of their son, nor should they ever abandon him. So be mindful that as much as when you're in the moment, you can't see into the future, there will be a future. And so they actually wound up doing that and called me later on and thanked me for it. And it's nice to know that wherever their future brings them, they can bring their son with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. But having to give that kind of advice to a family about...
Clearly, this was many years ago, and it's still fresh in my mind because it's just too painful.
Adam, you were just talking about a family that had more than one child, and one thing that strikes me as so awful about this situation is how tough it must be for the siblings of a child who has passed. So we learned that you have an amazing summer camp. Could you talk a little about Camp Erin and let us know how it works and how it aims to help kids heal from something so devastating and what some of the challenges are? Or...
Absolutely, and I appreciate you mentioning Camp Erin. We're a proud partner of a national network called Aluna, which is a series of 40-plus bereavement camps for children aged 6 to 17 living with the loss of a loved one. It could be a sibling or a parent or someone significant to them in the family. And we bring them together free of charge for the families for an amazing, powerful, sad, happy weekend summer camp each August. And at Camp Erin, kids really, for most of them, the first time are connecting with other kids who are living with their own loss. And as we've said a few times now, while each loss and death is unique, there are some common threads. So we see those bonds begin to form immediately. And then the camping experience is a mix of both supportive tools with clinicians and volunteers who are there to listen and be supportive to the youth, and also camp activities, capture the flag, rope courses, swimming. So everyone needs a chance to enjoy and have some time by the lake as well. And I'll just mention that on the other side of that lake at Camp Erin, we host a parent and caregiver retreat. So while the kids are having a supportive bereavement and camp experience, their parents and caregivers and loved ones are having the same experience. And then at the end of the camp, everyone comes together. And what some family members have told us is for the first time, they as a family unit have a common language around their shared grief. So moms and kids can talk about the loss of their son or their daughter, their brother, their sister in a new way. So it's an important piece to the puzzle of one's grief journey.
Yeah, I think that's really
Beautiful.
Amazing to be able to do that in a concurrent way. And we always talk about like knowing what to say to someone else who's going through something, but even within your own family, it's very difficult because different people within the family grieve in different ways.
That's right.
Adam Rabinovich, Liz and I just both want to really say thank you to you for being here.
And for all your work.
And for helping us gain some understanding so that we can all grow and heal and be supportive and help those that we love and that we know and that are part of our community to do the same. So thank you.
Thank you both for having me, and keep up all the good work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Well, that's the show for today. If you'd like to read more about Cope Foundation or to see some photos from Camp Erin, please visit the website at myfarewelling.com. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.